Hey everyone, so now we're going to talk about properties of addition and multiplication. And there are several properties. So we're only going to talk about a couple of them, the ones that are the most prevalent, the ones that you'll see come up the most. Okay, and most of these apply to both addition and multiplication. So I'll give you examples of um, both of them. So let's start by talking about the associative property. So the associative property states that when three or more numbers are either added or multiplied, then the sum is the same regardless of the groupings. So the way I like to think about this one is with parentheses. I can change where the parentheses go and it doesn't change the answer. So this is like a plus b plus c is equal to a plus b plus c. So it doesn't matter which ones are grouped together. It just matters, or because both sides will be the same. And I can write that for the multiplication as a times b times c would be equal to a times b times c. All right, so the next one is the commutative property. And the commutative property states when the two numbers are either added or multiplied, then the sum is the same regardless of the order. So now instead of grouping them with parentheses, what we're going to say is if I said A plus B, then I can also say B plus A, and it doesn't change the way the answers are. So each side is still equal. So for the multiplication, it would be A times B is equal to B times A. All right. Okay, now let's go to, this is where it kind of differs a little bit. So let's go to the distributive property. So the distributive property says the sum of two numbers times a third number is equal to the sum of each of the things that were added with the third number. So that was a lot of words, but let me write it down and I think it might make more sense. So if I said A times B plus C, that's the same thing as saying A times B plus A times C. So the way that a lot of kids really like to think about this is the rainbow method instead of the distributive method. So what we do is we kind of make this rainbow looking thing where you do A times B, the first chunk in the parentheses, and that gives you this part right here. And then you do A times C, which is the second chunk in the parentheses, which gives you this part. And depending on how many things are in the parentheses, it ends up kind of looking a little bit like a rainbow. Okay, now we only have two left. The first is the identity property of, and we're going to separate the identity property of addition and multiplication. So the identity property of addition says that the sum of any number and zero is equal to the original number. So like A plus zero is equal to A. We generally know that. We just have to make a rule for it, and that is called the identity property of addition. And then we also have the identity property of multiplication. So the identity property of multiplication says that the product of any number and 1 is the original number. So like A times 1 has to be equal to A. Once again, we kind of already knew that. We just had to give a name to it. So let's go through some quick examples and then hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense. So first example is 62 times 74 equals 74 times 62. Okay, so this one we're flipping the two things, which means that it's not associative because associative has parentheses, but it is commutative because commutative you are flipping the two sections. So what this is this is the commutative property of, and because it's multiplying, it's multiplication. Okay, number 2 is 3 plus 2 plus 1 equals 3 plus 2 plus 1. All right, so let's start from the top. We know it has parentheses, so it's either has to be the associative property or the distributive property because both of those have parentheses. But notice how the associative property has parentheses on both sides where the distributive only has it on one side. So automatically, I'm thinking that it has to be associative, but let's just double check. This has the exact same numbers, 3 plus 2 plus 1, but where the 3 and 2 are in parentheses. And then on the right-hand side, we have 3 plus 2 plus 1, but the 2 and the 1 are in parentheses. So we were switching where the parentheses were, which automatically means that it's the associative property. So I'm going to say associative property. And this one's of addition because it's adding. Okay. So this next example is 2 times 4 plus 5 equals 2 times 4 plus 2 times 5. Okay, so I just put my foot in my mouth a little bit because I just told you that the associative property has parentheses on both sides and the distributive property doesn't. But I'm going to tell you, this one's distributive property, but I want to explain why. So notice on the distributive, we have a multiplication sign and an addition sign on both sides. Normally we just have addition signs or multiplication signs. This is just a different way to, this example is just a slightly different way to write it than how I wrote it up here, because I'm using the multiplication sign instead of just multiplying them together. So this is considered the distributive property. Okay, and then one more example, which is 21 times 1 equals 21. Okay, so this doesn't look like the associative property because there's no parentheses. It doesn't look like the commutative property because you're not flipping things. Excuse me. It does not look like the distributive property because you don't have parentheses again. So it has to be one of these identity properties. Because it has the multiplication sign, I know it has to be the identity property of multiplication. And there we have it.